Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about the abandoned High Elven campaigns in patch 7.0 for Immortal Empires that came alongside the Tides of Torment DLC. Now, the High Elves have gotten a major racial rework, and Tyrion, Teclis, and Alifanar have gotten improvements in their campaigns. With Alifanar, it is an interesting case of a campaign to talk about because the only change they made for him, besides the racial rework, was introducing 2 new suitable climates. But those climates have vastly improved his campaign, beyond, of course, the dynamics of how High Elves play post 7.0. But then let's talk about Alarielle, Eltharion, and Imrik, starting with Alarielle. She is part of one of the least popular DLCs for the game, and that's the Queen and the Crown DLC. That view is consistent across every poll, across every community. You can think about Reddit, you can think about Discord, you can think about social media channels in general. A lot of people do not like this DLC. Though I think it's mostly to do with the perception that people have about Hellebrand and Alarielle's campaigns rather than any kind of substantial issues, at least for Hellebrand. Alarielle is a different situation entirely. Yes, she does get handmaidens, and handmaidens are one of the best heroes in the game from a campaign perspective because they get Favor of Avisha for the control benefit, they get diplomatic relations benefits, they get trade tariff benefits, and influence per turn. Alarielle, on top of that, she also, when she visits a settlement, she gives it influence, control, and growth for 10 turns through Power of Nature. So there's certainly a lot of power in this campaign. But here's where the friction exists between Alarielle's campaign and how High Elves play, as well as how the game is played in general. The most important portion of any campaign is going to be the early game. Doesn't matter which difficulty you're playing on, doesn't matter which legendary lord or race you're playing, it is always going to be the early game. And while Alarielle is really good from a long-term perspective because of the hero capacity for handmaids, as well as being able to recruit them and increase hero capacity for them at tier 3, as well as being able to recruit Sisters of Avalorn at tier 3, the friction that exists in her campaign is tied to the Defender of Ulthuan mechanic. The way this works is that if all of Ulthuan isn't directly controlled by the High Elves, you get penalties. Especially so if the inner portion of Ulthuan, which doesn't start under High Elven control because of the Scourge of Cain faction and the Cult of Exodus faction that Tyrion deals with, when inner Ulthuan is not under High Elven control, you get significant penalties in terms of construction costs as well as income. Now, the income aspect is not too big of a problem in a campaign because you do end up removing the inner Ulthuan penalty, but the construction cost one is a very significant one early on. Plus 20% construction cost, give or take, does end up hurting your early game by quite a bit. Yes, you can make it work using Archmages of Ulthuan with Administrator trait. But it is just that friction that she has in her campaign. And here's the thing, with the High Elven rework, they took the idea of High Elves controlling all of Ulthuan or having penalties, and they did it in a better way. Because the way it works through Patrons of the Realms, if you don't control certain territories of Ulthuan, you can't confederate other legendary lords, so you need to control specific provinces. For Tyrion's confederation, it is Alarielle and Etain. For Imrik, it is Calador and Terranok, and so on and so forth. And that is a much better system. Especially when you consider the fact that foreign presence in Ulthuan gets penalized with a limit on how much favor of the Phoenix King you can unlock. So that is a much better system than starting your campaign with a penalty and then not really caring about it later on. Because even if Inner Ulthuan is taken later on, or there's a foothold, enemy foothold in Inner Ulthuan, by the time you get to that stage, you're not really going to be interested so much in the construction cost or the reduction of income. And suffice to say, it is difficult for any faction to gain a foothold of Inner Ulthuan once Tyrion and Alarielle have secured it. This entire mechanic has never really worked that well for Alarielle. I think what Creative Assembly could have done with this is changed it around so it depends on how much of Inner Ulthuan is under control or how much of Ulthuan is under hostile control, not all or nothing. So if a majority of Ulthuan is under High Elven control, you get positives. If majority is not under High Elven control, you then get penalties, escalating dependent on that. Then we also have the Mortal World's Torment. This is a Lord effect that Alarielle has dependent on the corruption level in the provinces under her control. But the problem is, due to the way the corruption works in the game at the moment, you end up basically having it in the positive realm for control, corruption, and leadership RSIs. So that is another factor in that. On top of that, as a caster, her skill line is very lackluster. The spells she has are not really great, with the exception of Banishment and to some extent Arcane on Forging. Yes, Earthblood is good as a healing spell, but basically any mage and any archmage is going to be a better caster than Alarielle. And from a lore perspective, Alarielle should be a powerful caster. Not in the same way as Teclis, but still a very powerful caster in her own right. On top of that, the skill line decision between Tradition Dictates and Blood and Fire is a non-choice, really. Because Tradition Dictates is a much better choice from both a campaign and even battle standpoint. From battle standpoint, it comes down to the fact that it allows you to recruit Sisters of Avalorn faster and gives you melee defense for them for armies in local province. And also the fact that you get more handmaidens at higher rank through faction-wide recruitment of them makes it much better than, Blood and Fire, which doesn't quite work out from my perspective. The benefits certainly do exist there, but Tradition Dictates is better. Now, of course, Alarielle does have the benefit of being able to pick up the Sword of Cain without the same kind of penalties, because the penalties of the Sword of Cain get nullified by handmaids. So the Sword of Cain affects your economy, diplomatic relations, and control. But this is where handmaids come in through the Diplomat of the Everqueen skill line. And since Alarielle has more handmaids than anyone else, then you can understand the point. You can nullify all of the downsides of the Sword of Cain and not suffer any of those penalties. They could have done a better job with this campaign instead of leaving it as it is. My personal perspective as to why they didn't bother is just because Queen of the Crone is not a popular DLC. When we look at Eltharion's campaign, his focus is on fighting greenskins, and also Skaven. His short campaign victory conditions focus on the Badlands, his longer campaign victory conditions also focus on the Badlands, dealing with Grom, though Bretonnia is likely going to be able to do that for you, and defeating Ikiclaw. All well and good. But here's where some of the problems do exist. First off, he doesn't have mountain climate, which is a fairly significant aspect if you're going to be playing a campaign in the Badlands, because there's plenty of mountains in the Badlands or close to the Badlands that you will want to take. So that is a limiting factor. If there is one thing that they should have changed, it was that. But on top of that, he doesn't have the ability of using Underway. Alefanar does. And it's kind of hilarious to think about the fact that Alefanar, whose entire campaign is focused on vengeance on the Dark Elves, is actually better at playing Eltharion's campaign than Eltharion himself. I mean, seriously, Alefanar decimates the Greenskins. He actually struggles against Slaanesh and Dark Elves far more so than he would against Greenskins. It's kind of weird, because Eltharion's focused on Mistwalker units and melee units, whereas Alefanar is focused on range. Could we swap them around? And also, funnily enough, about that aspect, it kind of makes sense from a lore perspective, because when Eltharion was introduced, his entire vengeance crusade was against Dark Elves. Then they shifted that to focus on the Greenskins. But really, the bigger problem for Eltharion has to do with the dungeon. So this dungeon does give you a good number of benefits. You can interrogate prisoners, etc. But everything in said dungeon does require you to acquire warden supplies. And the only way that you can really do so is by capturing enemy lords in battles using the warden cage ability. Now, here's the issue. This creates a dynamic where what you want to do is fight every battle manually. Because while you can capture lords through auto-resolve, it is really weird and awkward to rely on that. So this campaign ends up being unplayable, in multiplayer at least, just because of that warden cage and supply situation, because no one's gonna let you play a multiplayer campaign and just fight every minor battle manually just so you can get warden supplies. But that's what you want to do in this campaign. And that's where things break apart. Good Legendary Lord, huge amount of power. A bit annoying, by the way, that livestock pens still don't allow you to recruit Illyrian Reavers and Silverhelms, which, you know, they should. Look at Khorne, look at the Greenskins, look at the Ogres, or at least Khorne and Ogres. They can get those units from certain resources. High Elves can't. I think they missed the mark with regards to that. But it is just these smaller changes that Creative Assembly has implemented. The one good thing about Eltharion is that you now can actually just focus on the Battlelands because of the guaranteed confederation with other High Elves. So you can give up Ivres, take territory, and just disband this army or much of it and focus on your core objectives. Yes, you will need to eventually confederate Tyrion to get Torivres, which is going to give you all those Mistwalker units. The problem with giving up Torivres, though, and this is where it becomes something of an issue, is that Torivres itself is critical for your campaign success. It's the main recruitment center of Mistwalker units. You literally need it in either the hands of an ally or direct control. But that is where it's good that you can use Patrons of the Realm and rely on Tyrion to secure the situation right there. Finally, we have Imrik. Now, Imrik's campaign mechanics do work. There's no major problems with respect to that. However, and that is the one big point, you can gain control of Calador through an event of Confederation. But that event, that mission, is not available on turn 1. So you either skip taking a territory on turn 1, so it counts towards the objective on turn 2, or you take a settlement and it's not going to count. And that is where things get annoying from the very beginning of this campaign. And it's those kind of micro annoyances in this campaign. He does have Mountain, he does have Wasteland, so that's great. His campaign ends up being focused on what he should. But on the flip side, he is in this campaign area with Nagashazar, with the Mountains of Morn, with the World's Edge Mountains, where having the Underway is not just an optional fact of life. It is so important to have the ability of Underway if you're going to navigate this campaign area. At least if you're starting it. If you're expanding later on in a campaign and you've built your core empire, that's a different discussion. But Imrik starts in the Darklands, Southern Darklands, yes. But he also starts close to Nagashazar, so imagine having to navigate all of this. This is very slow, very frustrating without the Underway. And it is frustrating, again, how even though Alifanar doesn't have mountain climb like Imrik, you could literally throw Alifanar in this campaign situation and he would do a lot better than Imrik. And that is not a joke. But those are just frustrations with Creative Assembly, ignoring the gameplay loop of campaigns in general, not improving them. I mean, they literally threw the mask and the Kala in jungles as starting positions. They put Sail in a corner position. I'm not quite sure they even considered this entire dynamic in a campaign. Actually, they even threw Wulfric in a jungle as well. It's like, they really, really want people to enjoy Lustra, and I'm like, people don't. Lustra sucks. It's always sucked. And while Mountains and Wasteland are better, they're only better if you have an underway capability, or if you're starting far enough away and you're expanding towards it naturally. It's one thing, for instance, to play, say, a campaign as Vlad and march on Zarnagurun to conquer it because of the benefits it provides. That's one thing. That is not painful because your core territory of Sylvania still gives you all those units and heroes and economy. It is a very different dynamic when you start here and you're surrounded by Drazif, Tretch, Queek, and others to deal with. Also, when your victory conditions do require you to deal with Tretch and Kugaf. Weirdly enough with Kugaf, I mean, I kind of think it's a weird one because he's not really someone you want to deal with. The only thing that's valuable in Kugaf's territory is the fact that he can give you this port, and yeah, there is also the Woodsman Hut. To be honest, dealing with Gorse might be a bit better, but not quite, right? So all the same, just weird decisions over there, or unfinished decisions, because this is kind of the part about Immortal Empires. I could see where the developers wanted to go with certain campaigns. That's why the Darklands was not finished initially, then they updated it for Cast Wars, but they never continued that. Then they moved on to the next big thing and the next big thing, instead of improving that core gameplay experience. And honestly, I hope the Lords of the End Times does reverse that trend, instead of just like, oh, we're gonna do more animations and cool units and visual effects on the campaign map. We'll find out. Stay tuned for more.